so honored. I'm Anne Choquette. I'm CEO of TheLi.st. We are a community of high impact women who are devoted to helping each other achieve and succeed. Jessi Gold is here today to launch her book, How Do You Feel? And she'll be in conversation with Lipi Roy, who is really like so thoughtful about these issues as they pertain to medical professionals, right? That's what brought you two together as medical professionals. How do you deal with how do you keep yourself strong and focused and centered when you are so overwhelmed by the hard work in front of you? But I think that what's so special to me about this is that in a time of loneliness and disconnect and burnout that we are all facing, this is what we need, right? Like I am not only responsible for myself, I am responsible for the well-being of my team, for the well-being of my community, for the well-being of my family, and I got to keep myself strong. So I'm going to tip out of the way. I'm going to let Lipi lead this conversation, and I'm going to put links in the chat to buy the book, give the book 5 stars, share it on social media. You guys, I am your ultimate moderator over here, and I'm going to get out of the way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Yay. Oh my God. So happy Monday, everyone. I am so thrilled that everyone's joining. This is going to be a great conversation, especially because not only is this a topic I'm very, very passionate about, but my friend Jessi Gold has written a book called How Do You Feel? It is mesmerizing. She is funny. She is smart. And I am just so thrilled to be able to talk to you, Jessi. First of all, Jessi, happy Monday to you. I know you had some technical issues, as did I, but hello, it's technical age. Everyone can relate to Zoom, WebEx, whatever issues. So how are you doing right now, my friend?
You know, it's a challenge. There's always something that makes things more challenging, and I'm trying to practice what I preach as much as possible, you know.
I hear you. I hear you. So first of all, can I ask, so I'm here in New York City in my home. Where are you, if you don't mind my asking?
Of course you can. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee. That's my home base these days.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Well, let's just dive in, my friend. I
Sure.
cannot wait to talk to you about, I know this is a topic obviously that's important to you. So you wrote this book, How Do You Feel? And I just want to know right off the bat, what made you decide to write this book at this time?
There wasn't like an aha moment. I think that would be nice to say that there was, but it was like I was going through seeing patients as a psychiatrist who primarily sees healthcare workers and college students, and was just witnessing kind of how we all collectively were struggling in the pandemic, but as it's continued, and wondering why, and thinking a lot about that, and thinking how that related to my story. And I think very much that our stories can change culture, and there are a lot of problems in our culture. So I really am working to think about that. And there isn't a book like this that actually tells our stories in this way and centers them. And it would have been a book I would have wanted to read when I felt disheartened by medicine. But also I hope that when people feel like caregiving is hard in any form, that they will feel like turning to it is helpful.
Well, I mean, I think it's, if people don't already know, mental health issues continue to be stigmatized, or people with mental health concerns. I don't even want to say diagnoses, just mental health issues in general, anything emotional, behavioral, it's still so stigmatized. People feel judged and shamed. You do a great job talking about that in your book. And one of the things I love about your book is that, I mean, I've read many, many memoirs, books written by doctors and other healthcare professionals. They're very scientific about it. You also share a lot of data, but you're also very vulnerable. You share a lot of personal stories, your own thoughts. And I think that will really resonate with readers, because I think a lot of times patients or the public don't feel they get that insight into what the doctor is thinking and feeling, but you do a great job doing that. What made you make that decision to kind of be vulnerable and share your own stories and insights?
I've always been like inching towards more and more vulnerability, I think, through my own writing and other ways. And this is like the most I've ever been vulnerable. But I think there's a lot of power in vulnerability, and that I can't expect other people to be vulnerable if I'm not. So for me to change the culture of medicine or healthcare or how we care about other people, if I'm not also contributing by changing how I'm talking about it and changing my comfort level and challenging myself, I'm not doing what I should, like practicing what I should preach in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember, so for those of you who don't know, so I'm an internal medicine physician. I specialize in addiction medicine. Jessi is a psychiatrist, and we're calling each other by first names, and I think that's okay, right, Jessi? That
It's totally fine. Yeah.
that's what I thought. Otherwise, she is Dr. Jessi Gold, and you really specialize in providing mental health, your mental health expertise to healthcare workers. But you also make it a point that your book, it's not just about healthcare workers. It can resonate and apply to general population and everyone else, right? You want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many themes that resonate with everybody, that like just because we have this little subculture of medicine and the paths we take to get there and the things that we do along the way, and obviously COVID had a particular impact on our population, but the issues of perfectionism, the issues of overwork, the issues of trying to balance life and work and caregiving and work, I think relate to everybody. I think I could probably rattle off any patient I've ever seen, and they all have problems prioritizing themselves given all of life's priorities. So while it focuses on healthcare, because those are the folks I see, and also because I don't think there are many ways they can see themselves, and it was really important to me to center that experience. I hope that people see themselves in their story, even if they don't practice in healthcare, but also maybe it'll help you understand your healthcare providers a little bit more too, because I don't know that we're very good at showing that side of us or showing that our work affects us, because we don't like to admit it. And so in a lot of ways, by kind of faking it, we're also faking it for our patients. And I don't know that that's helpful either.
I couldn't agree more. I that fake it till you make it. There's so many times in the book, it just was a flashback to what I went through during medical school, during residency. This idea of just showing up even when you're sick, much to our detriment. And the only permission we had to take time off was showing up. And then once we're actually coughing and hacking and being feverish and sweating and having active chills, our other colleagues or our boss would say, "Oh, you're too sick. Get out of here. Go home." That was our permission. I mean, when I read that, I'm like, oh my God, how many times did I do that? And it's not because we're trying to be macho. It's because of guilt, because we felt if we didn't show up, we would be a burden to our colleagues, right? And you've had many patients say that to you, and even you felt that, right?
I think burden is such a good word for it, because I think we feel like we're a burden on our colleagues, but we also feel like we're a burden on our patients. So I'm an outpatient psychiatrist. If I am sick and I cancel, those people won't be seen for like another month or so, because it's not like I could get them in tomorrow, right? And so that's a big thing to hold on your shoulders and decide, am I sick enough? And then you also see modeled for you and almost like seen as cool these people who like pass out in the OR and get right back to their job, or come in and then like have a miscarriage on the job, and they're like, well, I worked through a miscarriage, or I actively went into labor in the middle of my shift. And so you're like, I'm not sure what our bar is, but it sure isn't mental health, because you can't even see that. And so the only time I ever was sent home, a nurse sent me home and got in a fight with an attending who was supervising me as a resident, who was like, nope, she can't be here. And one of the things that is probably disappointing but true in medicine is like, before sick, we're like, could expose patients to it. And I was wearing a mask, but I was like, I saw them fighting, and he just came over and was like, you have to leave. And I was like, what did I do? And he's like, she says you can't be here, so you can't be here. And so, but it's sad that like, someone else had to advocate for me because of hierarchy. I didn't feel like I could advocate for myself, but also in the same setting, like if I left, they had to call someone else in, right? And so they have to call another resident to cover for me who's on vacation or elective and having a good time. And I'm like, here, like, come do this really hard rotation because I'm coughing. And so a lot to put on you. I think the workplace in general is like that for a lot of people because they make money by showing up, but also like it's just the bar is really high. But healthcare should be modeling better since we're actually the ones that take care of the sick people who need to miss work, you know?
Well, so a couple of things. Thank you for sharing that story. A couple of things that
Yeah.
really resonated with me. One was, first of all, nurses are the boss. They
Yeah.
really are. So when the nurse says something, it goes. That's the law of the land. Secondly, yeah, crazy that that's what it took. That there had to even be a discussion, let alone an argument, as to whether you can go home. It's I'm sure you've heard this phrase, Jessi, before, but the medical system, the medical culture, medical training culture can be very toxic, and not that much has changed.
Mhm.
It's still very toxic. So just last Friday, a couple of days ago, I gave a talk about burnout to primary care doctors and other specialists in the audience, just talking about how burnout is so prevalent, and it was before COVID, and COVID just made it worse. So that's going to be my next question. I would love to hear your insights. In your book, you talk about take what your experience was like taking care of healthcare professionals during this historic global disease crisis, this unique, unprecedented time. You and I were both actually frontline workers. And yes, we were both essential, even though the official word was that psychiatrists or outpatient people like you were not essential, which I completely disagree with. But you know, you and I had different experiences, but many aligned
Yeah.
experiences as well. I was living in New York. I was, first of all, doing a lot of media work. So I was on television every single day on MSNBC, because COVID was the headline. And then I started working at COVID isolation and quarantine sites as the medical director. By the way, this is a job that never existed before, right?
Mhm.
The hotels were vacant in New York, and they got converted to quarantine and isolation sites for COVID infected homeless individuals. You know that expression, building the plane as you're flying it? We didn't know what the
Yeah.
hell we were doing. Well, we were just trying to figure it out as we were going. So that was, and then we can go as the conversation goes. I'll talk to you more about, I talk more about my own just complete burnout, working 3 clinical jobs, doing the media, writing for Forbes, doing virtual speaking consulting. After a year and a half at that unsustainable pace, I completely burned out. A lot
Yeah.
of the emotions and experiences that you talk about with your patients really resonated with me. So my question to you, Jessi, was what was it like for you? Like, what unique challenges and stressors did you identify in your patients during this unique time? And just remind the viewers, people watching, what time frame this book
Yeah.
is. Thank you.
It it takes place during the first 6 months of the pandemic, in a lot of ways because it did show the cracks in the system, not because I wanted to write a book about the pandemic, right? So I know that people have strong opinions and strong reactions and triggers around the pandemic. But for me, it was like we had a lot of problems before. We had 50% burnout before. Like that's a huge number, higher than other fields. And then we had all these new stressors with the pandemic, and then we're left here now, right where we are. And so to me, it's a setting that shows the cracks, that compounds the problems, and then you can see kind of how we ended up where we are now. You know, for me, I similarly, you know, you mentioned the essential worker thing. I had a lot of guilt about like not being on the front lines while I'm listening to people who are on the front lines, and was like, I wonder if I need to like suit up and go. And there was no role for me, but I felt bad being safe, and that contributed to my overwork. So I don't know if that's part of what you were feeling, but I felt like I had to be a better advocate. I had to be writing more stuff. I had to see more patients. I had to do more outreach because that's how I was contributing. And it was like some kind of thing where I really had to overcome that. And we had never done telehealth before. I hadn't done one visit like that. And then all of a sudden I'm doing it all day. And so adjusting to that was really hard. And I think also for patients was really hard. You know, I hear all sorts of things in people's experiences in the front lines, from, you know, angry, like people interacting with them, to trouble with staffing, to You know, people just having a lot of emotions about the situation, but not being able to, or not really being allowed to, or having the space to feel them, you know, and I think that healthcare in general is pretty bad with emotions, but you throw on the hero thing and all of a sudden we're not supposed to either, because we're supposed to run towards the fire and just keep going. And so I think that was an extra added burden for folks. And similar to you, I burnt out pretty bad, but I didn't notice until I was pretty bad. And I think part of that was, it's easy to push down the little stuff and kind of say, oh, work's supposed to make you tired, or of course I'm emotionally exhausted, I'm a psychiatrist, right? Like, why wouldn't I
Just
be?
we
And then,
justify it, right? We rationalize
yeah,
it.
so much, like, you know, it makes sense, I think, for lots of people in lots of workplaces, right? Like in any workplace you can say, to work hard means I am tired, to work hard means I am doing more hours, whatever it is. It's American work culture for sure. I think it's probably the culture in some other countries too, but it's for sure in ours. And you know, it's predominantly worsened in healthcare just because of, like, you know, the expectation to do so much, especially in a pandemic where we're needed so badly. And so I mean, I burned out, like fell asleep every day after work without knowing I went to sleep, and would wake up and be like, oh, what was that? But like so many of us, you know, it's like I tried to blame it on physical health conditions. I try, you know, I just didn't want to actually think it was something mental,
Yeah.
which is just almost upsetting, but true, just because I come from the same culture that all of us were raised in, even if I practice one way. And that's how I talk to patients and truly believe what I'm saying.
You know, I think you and I both mentioned either explicitly or implicitly this idea of burden, but also the guilt, that emotion that's associated with it. And just said, you know, she was kind of surprised about the guilt thing. Let me tell you though, folks, it is so common, and it's I would say a prime indicator, if or a predictor of just massive burnout and just all these other health consequences and repercussions that are associated with burnout. For me specifically, working at this crazy pace and a schedule with responsibilities that I'd never quite had before. And we were all dealing with tremendous uncertainty, right? SARS-CoV-2, we discovered eventually that this is not your typical respiratory virus. It was affecting the brain and the heart and your GI system. And I was, as the science was coming out every day, I was trying to write about it and then talk about it without looking like an idiot, right? Because I'm on national television. So I'm trying to understand the information and then provide that data on national television. At the same time, certainly here in New York, people were actively dying. We had freezer trucks as morgues. I mean, it's crazy to think about that. And my own friends and colleagues who are residents, medical students, house staff in like Jamaica, Queens, in Brooklyn, the Bronx, working these community hospitals in the city. They were going to codes or, you know, cardiac arrest. Nobody was wearing a mask. We had insufficient PPE. So many of those doctors and nurses got infected, and now have either long COVID or they've really tragically have died. You know, so dealing with, so understanding that, yet also recognizing, and this is where my own, I think, burnout and feelings of guilt came, was that here I am, I was living and still am living in a nice home. I have wonderful relatives, supportive family and friends. I had my health. I was working multiple jobs. I had money coming in. People were meanwhile facing unprecedented unemployment, job and food insecurity. And I felt tremendous guilt and shame, like I wasn't doing enough. And I think though that you talk about that as well. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, all these different emotions that go into people feeling burnout. And by the way, I know we're talking about burnout as healthcare professionals, but we know that burnout is
Yeah.
experienced by people in all professions. We have a lot of mostly women at part of the list. Thank
Yeah.
you, the list, for hosting this. So I was wondering if you could speak to a bit of that burnout.
Yeah, let me define it first because I think like probably not everybody knows that's listening. So we use it again to kind of just mean like work was hard, but that's not what it really is. So it's like this constellation of three things. One is emotional exhaustion that can look like you're just spent at the end of the day, nothing left for anyone. The second depends on who you ask, can either be depersonalization or cynicism. Depersonalization is how we actually learn to cope in medicine. So we were taught to distance ourselves, to not actually be able to, feel when we're seeing stuff. We were taught to separate ourselves as much as possible. And
Attached.
in this circumstance, it's like permanent detachment. Like you actually can't undetach, right? Like every situation you're disconnected. And cynicism is like anger. And then the last one is a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. So you're just not getting enough done, feeling ineffective. I think a lot of people had that. And so for me, ineffectiveness came from I can't fix the pandemic with medication, right? So people are coming and they have all these problems and I can't fix it. And I think in medicine, in so many ways, we are taught to try to fix it. And if we can't, there are other avenues for that, like palliative care or something like that. But in our field, the meds are imperfect, but in so many ways, like my goal is to make people better. And all of the things that were causing stressors, I could not make better. And so I felt ineffective in that sense. And then also was listening to like trauma after trauma after trauma that were similar. So often you get a little bit of break, right? Like sometimes, it's a hard day and you get one hard person and a little break that's a little lighter and another hard person. For me, it was like same story, hard story, hard story, hard story. And so then at the end of the day, I was just like, that was a lot, and then I again had this like underlying guilt of like what it meant to be a psychiatrist versus something else. My sister was doing internal medicine in Boston, and so also was doing different stuff, and I had feelings about that. But how much risk we were putting ourselves in, it was just really interesting, and I think I wouldn't have noticed my own feelings in that circumstance, which I think a lot of people can recognize, when you're so keyed up to like try to help other people or so keyed up about everyone else's stressors, like yours doesn't measure up. So you don't even measure it. In medicine, we're taught to like ignore having to go to the bathroom, ignore eating. So if we're ignoring that, of course, we're ignoring emotions, right? But in that same context too, like when you hear all these bad stories, you play like I call it guilt Olympics, or like, you're sort of like, well, mine doesn't count because that person's is worse. So like I need to just deal with the fact that work is making me stressed because they're out there risking their lives and they're out there like trying to support their family and whatever it is, right? And so you're always comparing because you hear the worst of the worst, especially as a psychiatrist. And so you're needs never really can crack that. And so I've often had to like reframe and be like, the worst story is still yours, right? Like your feelings about your situation matter too. And you can't say you don't deserve to feel that way because other people feel worse.
Well, and you just brought up a point that I was a nice segue to what I was going to say about when I was feeling these emotions of guilt. First of all, thank God for psychiatrists like you and mental health professionals like you. I called a really good friend of mine who's a psychiatrist in Westchester, and I said, Candida, I can't believe I shouldn't be feeling this way. I look at all the I don't want to say luxuries and privileges I have. Like I like, why am I feeling the anxiety and the I can't sleep, all these emotions and behavior, like I was struggling. And she said something that a lot of you amazing psychiatrists say, which is, Lippy, your feelings are valid. Your emotions are valid. Don't compare it to other people. Whatever you're feeling in that moment is valid. And I think that's what you just pointed out, Jessi.
Yeah. Aren't psychiatrist friends the best? However, don't we also have to answer our friends' phone calls like that? I will say I also started ignoring my friends and family for the same reason, right? So I knew that my friends and family were going to be turning to me for that stuff. And like validly too, because I'm a listener. I was before I went to psychiatry training. So you are going to ask me questions and you are going to come to me when you need to vent or need support. And I actually just like started ignoring phone calls and text messages, which is very unlike me. And a lot of my friends got worried very quickly just by that sign, but it was a way for me to like not also add the friends and family support to what I was doing, which happens a lot being a psychiatrist.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and just point out, yeah, boundaries are important. Like there's times
Yeah.
when you just have to say, you have to recognize when to say no to who or to what tasks and responsibilities and asks. You just have to set boundaries, absolutely, because it's essential for our mental health. So Jessi, the list is made up of like extremely high achieving, diverse group of women from all sectors. You and I both take care of a lot of female patients. And I think you and I both know that women, girls and women from all walks of life face unique challenges and
Yeah.
stressors. So my question for you that I think will be relevant to our audience, what unique challenges and stressors do women face that maybe increase their risk for mental health disorders and issues?
Yeah. So if you take a household with two physicians, like the male and the female, this is what it was studied, two genders were both physicians, and you looked at them during COVID about burnout, the women were much more likely to decrease their work hours to support their family, to do the schooling, to support the family, to do the chores around the house, to support the family. And they literally went to the same amount of school, right? Like they have the same training, but we took that all on. And you see that in them having more burnout as a result. So, if you're a person who is at home taking care of your kids in school, if you think about doing that while also trying to take care of patients, I think that was an additional thing. I think we always, we take on a lot of the extra sort of caregiving tasks without, support in so many ways. And it's almost like an expectation. And that expectation is hard to then put up boundaries or, say no to, because it's sort of like our role in so many ways. And, women traditionally have more burnout as a result, and did substantially even in those like sort of very similar job roles in the pandemic, and we continue to see that. And I do think it's because we take on so many other, burden's the wrong word, but it's what comes up, but like roles that contribute to that, like what we need to be doing, right? Like you aren't supposed to just be like a good doctor, you're supposed to be like a good doctor and a good mom, right? Or a good business person and a good, like all of these things, like we want to be perfect in all of them. And we really punish ourselves if we fall in either, right? Like, and you don't want to. And so you're trying really, really hard to just like keep going with both, hoping that you can be perfect at both. And it's really hard to do that. I mean, it just is. And I don't know that we say that enough. I mean, for me, I was single. I am single. I was by myself the whole pandemic. And so like I had different stressors that way. But I think looking at everyone, it's like, these kind of added things just add up and add up and add up.
Yeah, and what you're talking about in terms of the disproportionate burden that women carry in terms of the domestic burdens, I mean, that existed before the pandemic and during COVID. Plenty of data has now come out showing that the pandemic disproportionately affected girls and women because they were the ones pulled out of school to go into the workforce. Girls globally were pulled into becoming child brides, and then and then women were the ones pulled out of the workforce to take care of the kids who were now because the school shut down. They were the ones doing elderly care, and a lot of this is all unpaid labor. I think of the book by Soraya Chemaly, the amazing book called Rage Becomes Her, where she highlights all the many reasons why historically, even to this day, girls and women around the world have so many reasons to be angry, but society, we are raised to not express anger. Boys, yeah, it's okay, they can get angry, but because we are not socialized to, express that anger, it manifests in
Yeah.
other ways. I think of like certainly substance use, I'm sure depression, anxiety, and many other behavioral issues. So can you speak to any of
Yeah,
that?
I mean, anger is one of my favorite emotions, but I don't know that it's valued as that. I think we consider worry and anxiety to be a warning sign, and sadness and depression to be a warning sign, but we don't really pay attention to anger. But it's always telling you something. Like if you're mad, there's a reason, and there's a reason for it. So actually, one of my early signs of burnout is like email anger. It's like this
Yeah.
just rage at, like, if somebody sends me another email, I'm going to take my computer or phone and like break it, because what is an email? More asks. What is an email? More tasks, right? And so I've learned and sort of like worked on understanding that, and the anger behind it is I have nothing to give. There's going to be more asks and I have nothing to give already, right? And so the anger is protection. It's like, how dare these people ask me more things? I don't have space for that. And so I think that we protect ourselves with that in a lot of ways, but then don't ask ourselves what it means. So I'm pretty big on like, I like an anger, but when I start to get angry, I want to know like why, and not just like, I just want to rage and just be angry all the time. Though we should be allowed to feel whatever we need to feel, and like out loud, and have space for it.
Right. This is so awesome. I just love your insights here, Jessi. I want to leave some time for questions, but a
Yep.
couple other questions I want to ask. So first of all, you and I are both fans of pop culture, of TV, film, music. I
Totally.
would love to know, because I certainly have my opinions from a medical standpoint. Are there any shows or films that you feel that get psychiatry right? And or which ones just make you cringe?
It's like this universal, my face was this universal, everybody who is a psychiatrist or a therapist is like sleeping with their patients thing, that was like my first reaction. uh
Life is
there
not
are
ER, okay, or Grey's Anatomy, okay? I am not sleeping like it just doesn't. I wish my
no.
life was half that dramatic.
Yeah, the thing with Grays and stuff, like they barely have psychiatry or psychology or anything in there. Like, the uniqueness of my job does not come through in those settings, right? So they're medical TV shows, and you very rarely see it impact their mental health. There was one storyline with Jo where she went to PTSD treatment for EMDR, and I thought that was actually pretty good. But for the most part, I think I'm grossly underwhelmed by the storytelling, which is why I work to improve storytelling and work with MTV and like listen to what they've got coming out and trying to improve what the stories that we're making. And we made this whole media guide around it for the same reason, because I sit and watch shows and I'm like, oh, good, another person who has depression with the same symptoms and looks exactly the same, and nobody's going to identify themselves in that image. Or good, another psychiatrist who looks unaccessible and like doesn't listen to you and just drugs you. Like, that's super unhelpful for me, because I think people are inherently scared of psychiatry. I mean, the other problem that comes with us is like horror films. Like they place them in mental, like, a mental hospital, like a mental establishment. And so people, like, you're admitting them and they're like, you mean I have to go like in the horror movie? And you're like, but no, it'll really help you, I promise. It's a really hard sell though when you're in that setting and trying to have conversations with people. So
I'm sorry if it's in the horror genre, sorry to cut you off, just, but I mean, I'm sorry, but I think that perpetuates the stigma of like psychiatry as well, being like, oh, it's scary, or like only
totally.
crazy, scary monster people become psychotic. I mean, it just perpetuates
Yeah.
these misperceptions society already has. And when you
Ugh.
think back, like, I'm not to age anyone here, but I mean, it's a classic film, what, One
One
Flew Over
through
the
over.
Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, so yeah.
So there are people, I mean, probably less with Gen Z, but like to this day, that will not get electric, like convulsive therapy because of that, like because that image was so scary and so ingrained in them that they just are like, absolutely not. And so that movie had significant repercussions in the book to how people perceive our field, but in particular that intervention, which can be completely life-saving for people, and they turn it down because of things like that.
Yeah, and then again, I'm using the example of actual medical shows, but there's a lot of other programming, like say Law and Order. Like there's all these like because and other, like SVU, the movie A Star Is Born. I mean, I think so. There's the intersection of health, mental health, and the criminal justice system. But I think it's great that I think both folks like you and I are both using our medical psychiatric expertise to help influence and shape the way stories are told and narratives are written about topics that I think are truly important, but are often misunderstood by, say, producers and other television folks, entertainment folks who just don't have the same training as we do, but they're
Yeah.
so impactful and powerful in the way they tell these stories, right?
Yeah, I think a lot with storytelling is sometimes they're based on personal experiences, particularly with mental health, and they need to zoom out some, which is where an expert can come in, because we might have our own experiences, which I do, but we also have hundreds of other experiences. And so we can say collectively, the thing we need to talk about here is recovery, or the thing we need to talk about here is how meds work, or the thing we need, and so they might be really focused on the story, but miss that the story has broader implications, and that they could add one line and have broader implications conversations. So I think that's one of the cooler things about thinking about these things is like, yes, it would be great to be involved from the get-go, but inherently a lot of these things are just like slight changes and can really impact like how they're portrayed and what you're talking about.
Absolutely. So there's some great questions coming in. We will get to the questions. I think my last really one that I have for you, Jessi, and feel free to also share any other comments you want. But I want to know, given the stressful lives that you and I both lead, and the people listening lead as well. I would love to know what you do to care for your mental health. And if it's okay, I'll share a few things that I do for my own self-preservation. And by the way, self-care is not selfish. It is essential to preserve our mental and physical well-being.
Makes
I
us a better leader too, which I think is missing. Like, I think we think that stepping away and doing something and taking care of ourselves makes us less good at the thing that we're worried about being good in. It actually makes us better, and it's a whole reframe. And that we need to be able to say, like, getting help makes me a better leader, getting help makes me a better mother, getting help makes me a better caregiver, whatever it is.
It doesn't make
Sorry,
you
I jumped in.
No, it doesn't make you weaker. These are the messages we need to really drive home. And so now, again, speaking as physicians, I know that in our culture, we used to have this kind of mantra thing. Oh, I only got 5 hours. Well, I only got 4 hours. I'm like, dude, that's not, I can't believe I just said, dude, I say that. That is not a thing to be proud of. And so now when I give talks, and I have like one of my last few slides is about self-care tips that are, by the way, evidence-based, and that I personally use. One of them is I am very intentional about getting my 7 to 8 hours of sleep. That would have been unheard of a few years ago, but now that I know that chronic sleep deprivation is associated with every chronic illness from heart disease, stroke, and dementia, I'm very intentional about that. I also just try very hard to eat as healthy as possible in terms of plant-based meals throughout the day. You don't have to eat 3 big meals, but I try to get fruits and vegetables in throughout the day. And then I think another big one for me is really the connection. And I know you talk about that in your book as well. Loneliness is the new epidemic. Connecting to people. And I told these doctors in this keynote last week, you don't have to have 400 friends. You just need to have 4. I'm making up the numbers, but the point is having meaningful relationships in your life, meaningful friendships outside of your family, but of course within your family too, but people who genuinely care about you, who are offering to help you, take them up on that offer, and then offer to help others. But I think for me, connection is key, sleep, and just trying to get good nutrients in your body, which helps your mental health and your physical health. What about you, Jessi? What are you doing to care for your mental health?
Yeah, I go to therapy every week. I have for a long, long time. It's very important to me. I don't see it as a thing that I just do when I'm in crisis. I see it as a thing that I do to help me be better. And it's really important to how I think and how I take care of myself. And she's very good about figuring out things that I wouldn't with myself, despite being trained in it, right? I'm on meds. I've been on meds since college. And I think that's important to point out, because I think for a long time, I didn't feel comfortable saying that out loud, but I think it's important that I say that out loud, especially given what I do. Day-to-day coping, I try to do different skills because I get mad at them at different times, so I will be like, okay, I'm in a journal today, I like journaling, or okay, I'm going to go for a run today, I like running. Whatever it is, I kind of switch it up depending on how I'm feeling, because I'm not like a one-size-fits-all coping skill kind of person. Like, I don't love just doing one thing, and it helps me do different things. And I saw that also Anne said this, but like, I got really used to actually checking in on myself. So as much as we need to check in on others, which is part of it too, and that's how we change culture, being vulnerable, being open, being honest, which we're not, and saying like, this is hard, or balancing work and life is hard, or I feel guilty sometimes, or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be like, hi, I'm Jessi, I have had depression and burnout and I take meds and go to therapy. Somebody has to do that, but not everybody, right? And so we can really make a better culture of caring, being open and vulnerable with each other. But, with ourselves, we actually have to realize we're part of the equation. So it's very easy to go through the motions of work and to not like ever ask yourself how you're doing. My therapist was like, have you ever done that? And I realized I had never, ever actually paused and been like, how am I feeling? And I'm very quick to, okay, fine it. And okay, fine aren't feelings. As I told you in the talk that you quoted, we consider fine to be feelings I'm not expressing. And so inherently there's more to it there. And if you're checking in, you can notice things that are changing, right? Like if you check in regularly, you can say, I'm not doing well. I need to do one of those coping skills instead of I'm a 10 out of 10. I got to take time off. This is bad, right? And once you check in with yourself, like feelings, don't judge them. Let them be there, right? So I think the other thing we tend to do with feelings is immediately try to get rid of them and do a coping skill right away. Like I feel mad. What makes me not feel mad? Go do that. And that's not healthy. Like we really should just be mad, right? And not fix it right away. You might fix it later, but you don't need to fix it right away. And also don't go, is this feeling bad or good? Right. So I'm very quick to be like, sadness is bad, happiness is good, neutral is good, right? And like that isn't like striving for happiness is unrealistic because we're not all going to be happy all the time. And striving for like some balance and neutrality is like much more likely. Like you're going to have both, you
Don't
know,
judge
so you
them
can't
anyway.
say, no, don't judge it. Yeah.
Jessi, I cannot thank you enough. I mean, your insights, your folks, for those of you who don't know, Jessi, not only is she so smart, but she's really funny. She's so authentic. I mean, it just comes out when you meet her and talk to her and listen to her. She's funny. Please read this book. Get this book. How do you feel? I mean, you're going to learn so much. It's going to resonate with you as it did with me. So please get the book. And
I
I see
tried to
that
be funny in it. I still
you're
tried to be funny.
you're
You know,
natural.
it's like it's a serious topic, but my head is always funny. So if I'm gonna make some jokes, they're still gonna be there. I'm a Swiftie, so you get some Taylor Swift references. You know, I try.
We doctors also have a very dark, warped sense of humor. I'm a big fan. Laughter is the best medicine. So, Anne, I see that you're back. Did you want to maybe moderate some of these questions? What do you want to do?
Well, I want to, we just have a couple of minutes, and I do think,
Yeah.
thank you for getting to my questions. I appreciate that. Uh, I wanted, I'm going to ask one of the questions from the chat, and then I'm going to ask you to answer this question, and then we'll wrap up. So, the question I want you to answer is, how can we help you? Like, I know we're all here to buy the book, share the book. I didn't link to Amazon because you can't give you 5 stars yet, but everybody should give you 5 stars once the book comes out. But what can we do? What else can we do for you? Like, how else do you want to see this book grow in the world? So before you answer that one, you can think about that for 3 seconds while I ask you this question that's in the chat, which is, how has your perspective of burnout changed after writing this book?
Yeah. I think I didn't realize like how you can process things along the way and not fully process it all, right? And so when I wrote it, it was really different than what I was doing along the way in therapy and getting to reflect and actually think about what the experience felt like, what it felt like listening to my patients, what it felt like doing that. And that self-reflection part, I think, was really big in helping me kind of understand myself even more, even though I was like very proud of me for, you know, at all realizing I needed help in the first place. I think my perspective also has changed in that if I'm a burnout expert and I can't identify that I'm burnt out, like why would my patients? And so I think for me, it's really important for me to point that out to them and be very kind about how normalized it is in our workplaces to look next to us and see someone else who isn't sleeping and look next to us and see someone else who looks just mad all the time and go, I guess this is how I'm supposed to feel. But I don't think it's how we're supposed to feel. I think we're supposed to feel better than that. And that each individual person can help make us feel better than that. And like, that's sort of how I've thought about this differently.
Yeah. And for me, like regarding, and thank you, Mysa's a medical student, I believe in Chicago. Thank you for the question. For me, burnout is just, I realize that it's an absolute crisis. Especially physician burnout, but really burnout in all sectors. It's a crisis, and we need to address it. We need to acknowledge it, recognize what the signs and symptoms are, and get help. There is no shame in getting help. Not only is there no shame, but it's absolutely critical. So that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, the stigma still makes me sad. Like we stigmatize ourselves very much all in culture, but particularly in medicine, and sort of see burnout like a failure or something that like we could prevent if we just worked harder. And so I hope that people realize that that's not true and that work just can affect you sometimes, especially when you do what we do, but all jobs can. And it's really important to notice that and recognize that and not beat yourself up about that and say, turns out work is hard and it's called work, but that doesn't mean it has to be horrible for you mentally and physically. And should I answer Anne's question?
Yes,
I
I
mean,
want to know, how can we help you? What can we do with our 2 minutes left? Like, how can
yeah,
we help you?
I mean, authentically and vulnerably, with the book being something that took 3.5 years, but then happens to come out during an election year right before an election, it's a little challenging to get in there and have people notice it. So anything to help in that way would be helpful. I mean, I think for me, advocacy is a way to give yourself and not actually prioritize yourself in those settings, and taking care of yourself during a process that can be hard and the world can be challenging, I think is important for people to recognize that it has value there. I think it's important that we have students and trainees and stuff like that talk about these things. And so it's important for me to like get into schools and get into programs and have them read it and do book clubs around it and have me come talk about it. I feel the same with workplaces. Like, yes, it centers on healthcare, but if your workplace is like a big workplace that happens to have a lot of people who all seem burnt out all the time, yes, this book is relevant to you and it can spark conversation. And I think it's easier to digest than reading an article on it. And it's definitely easier to digest because of the stories, and you'll relate to it. And there's self-help in there. It's just not like, you have burnout, you do this. And so you will learn things that can help you too. So I think it has positive outcomes in that sense too. So those are like the first things that come to mind. Obviously, buying it and all that is really helpful too, but I think just breaking through in this cycle is a little challenging.
Let me
I
just
think that's
add,
a really good ask. Yeah, go ahead,
and
Lipi.
really quickly, the chat, like these chat, the way that Jessi structured the book, they're very short, easy to read chapters. So you get it, so it flows really quickly and nicely and smoothly. And the way she writes, she doesn't use high-level medical jargon. It's very conversational, and she's so authentic. And to Jessi's point, these are universal themes that apply to all of us, everyone in all sectors. So that's why I think it's just in that way really applicable.
I'm so happy you said that. I also want to give everybody like the walking away points. Buy the book, share the book, invite Jessi to speak, and hand a copy of her book to your doctor so that you can say, hey, would it be great for you to take this to your staff, to your team, to your department? I feel like all of those things, plus any like I want to see you unlocking all of those like famous medical consultants on TV. I want a huge national discussion about it, maybe post-election, but hey, this book's gonna have a long tail. So
I hope so.
thank you all for joining us here today. Thank you, Lipi, Dr. Lipi Roy, for joining us
Yes,
today.
thank you so much, Lipi.
Energy, and Dr. Jessi Gold for bringing us such a smart insight. I'm going to work with my own feelings now that you've taken me into the deep end of where I was during the pandemic. I'm going to sit with all of those feelings for the day. That's all right. I got it. No judgment. We're just going to sit with those feelings and see what happens.
Yes,
Thank
no
you
judgment.
all. Thank you all.
Thanks
Bye,
for having us.
everyone.
See you